Bottom of the table. Just to throw back to the start. Relegated team predictions. I thought it would be West Ham. Rachel, you thought it'd be Crystal Palace. Lo and behold, who's currently looking like they're right? Is this the most competitive relegation battle we've seen in the WSL?
Yes, without a shadow of a doubt. I'm not even going to let you. Yes, come on, it's great. It's not great, but it's more exciting.
Thank you so much for listening. That's us.
The end. It's wonderful.
Stop saying unusual words.
It's Irish, Chloe. By the way, guys, I'm sure many of you switch off by the end of the episode where we're saying goodbye to you, but I've been throwing in little sprinklings of Irish at the end of every episode, and Chloe doesn't like it.
Yeah, definitely catch those at the end. That is the best bit of the pod. Palace are currently on 5 points, Leicester on 6, West Ham on 8, and Everton on 9, alongside Liverpool and Villa. If we look at the past 4 WSL seasons, teams to finish bottom have registered 6, 11, 11 and 12 points. Rach, do you feel quite confident in your start of the season prediction? I can imagine that you do, given where Crystal Palace are currently placed.
No, I don't. I think given there's so many in and around that half the table, like half of the table could potentially be relegated, which we've never had before. And I feel like Palace are learning game on game. I've had nothing but praise for Palace so far this season. So no, not at all confident. I think, I feel like they're just going to carry on learning. Maybe they'll do some business in the January transfer window. Could be a very different story.
I think, it was interesting to see their kind of match up against Man United this week. It was, it wasn't their strongest game at all. Obviously not walking away with the points, but there was a little bit of heart to them, but not as much as I would have liked. I mean, you'd have probably, if you'd have said to Laura Kaminsky at the start of the season, you're only going to lose 1-0 against Man United with half the season still to go, she probably would have bitten your hand off and gone, do you know what? Like, that's a pretty good run in. That shows development. That shows that we're doing the right things. But it was difficult. Palace did have a couple of fairly decent chances. They didn't have a lot of them, but they did have a couple. But it was quite backs to the wall for a lot of that game. And maybe that is just this half of the season tiredness creeping in, because you've got to remember, when you look at like the stats that are going to be taking place between the championship, like the amount of running they're doing, the amount of explosive movements they're doing, they're going to be like 10, 20, 30% higher than what they're used to. They're not going to have had as much possession as they did in the Champions League, Women's Championship. They are going to spend large amounts of the games trying to get the ball back and kind of adopting different tactics, and that takes its toll mentally and physically. So, for them to come out of that game thinking, 1-0, obviously not the points you wanted and probably not the performance that we probably could have done. I think to get to this point in the season and still have done this well and still have the kind of heart that you think, do you know what, they're not out of it, I'll rate it.
So I spoke to Laura Kaminsky pre-match and about the fact that, it must give them heart that they're in games, and not just that, but there's a lot of teams around them that can so easily be dragged down into it. And she said she'd read something earlier that week where they had described Crystal Palace as rooted to the bottom of the table, which kind of implies that, they're 6 points behind everybody and have just been dead last this whole time. And even last weekend during the games, at one point they were 10th. In game when the table shifts, they were 10th at one point, then they dropped to 11th, then they were, and actually that's how close it is. In game, you could literally move up 2 levels in the 2 point positions in the table. It's not a kind of situation where you're fairly confident that they're out of it. And I think that's probably it's hard when you lose a game and to gear yourself back up for it. And maybe that was the case with the United game. They'd been in the wars a bit with West Ham the previous week. They'd had midweek games. So that's the lessons they're learning. But they can be very proud, I think, of the performances they've put in this half of the season. 100%.
And like you said, a win right now would take them straight up to 10th. I mean, it's a different gravy at the bottom at the moment. Everton are the only team in that bottom four, so beating a side in the top half. Man City, obviously, this weekend. They also got a point out of Arsenal and 3 points against Liverpool. Their next 3 WSL games after the break are against Aston Villa, West Ham and Leicester. I mean, as fortunes go, Everton, that's not a bad run, Hans. That is not a bad run at all. Do we think there's still so much more to see of Everton?
I think their performances and the fact that they've taken points off top teams makes me think they have enough to stay up.
Definitely.
I think if they can add some depth, even if they use the loan system, I know there's potentially, a change at Everton potentially coming through in time for the January window. But, I do think that they often think a window ahead. So they might not be fully prepared to go out and buy in a load of new players at the January window. But even if they use the loan system, they just need to give themselves a little bit more depth. And we could potentially start seeing them putting some of the chances they're creating away, which is an area that they've struggled with.
Well, I think it's something that Brian Sorensen kind of spoke about back in November in terms of trying to get more depth. They've obviously had a really bad run of injuries at the start of the season, which weren't ideal. But he even said, January signings are essential. But it's always been the case with Everton that it's the budget for them that's kind of held them back. Saying that, the Friedkin Group are on track to become the new Everton owners before Christmas. It's really hard to know how things are going to go with owners. We've seen one half with Jim Ratcliffe and his incredible thoughts at Man United. And then you kind of look at someone like a Michelle Kang coming in for London City Lionesses, and it's sort of, there's two different gravies of ownership group, and it's going to be really difficult, but probably quite easy to tell quite early on the priorities that are placed. Because I think for Everton to do well this season, I don't think they need loads of investment. I think they just need key players in the right area, which aren't going to be that expensive in the scheme of budgets, really.
Yeah, I don't think getting in, I'm sure if you could find a world-class number 9 that's available and wants to come, great. But I don't think that's necessarily like the thing they need. I just think they need a couple of solid players that can just give them that bit of depth.
100%. Well, let's wait and see what's going to happen. Please be good. Please be nice owners. Please. Okay, let's go to Leicester. What have we thought of Amandine Miguel?
I think she's another manager who has been massively hamstrung by injuries. Particularly in that number 9 role, which is something she said she's never really experienced. She's experienced injuries within a squad, but in like such a key area, and that's been difficult. Yeah, it's been difficult for them to manage. I think she's gotten them pretty solid defensively, which is impressive. I touched on that earlier. They've got like the 5th best defence in the league. I think if she can get some players back after Christmas, or even get someone into the January transfer window, it would definitely help. Maybe allow us to see a bit more of what she can do with a stronger, fuller squad, I guess. Because at the moment we're watching her manage a struggling Leicester, player-wise, and I think it's kind of a hard way to judge a new manager.
It's a really interesting season this year, because I do feel like there's at least 4 or 5 teams really that have been completely impacted by injuries.
Big injuries,
big injuries to big players. When you look at like Garley and Bunny Shaw and like Lauren Hemp, and you kind of think these are like Leah Volti. These are big names for all different types of reasons as well. It's
Deisha Buchanan.
Yeah, I don't think this is a season that's necessarily firing on all cylinders, to be honest.
No. I will say one thing for Amandine. She's very funny. So if you do have the time to join a Leicester City press conference, I'd recommend it, because she has you laughing about the fact that they've like such a low number of players available, and you're like, I shouldn't be laughing at this, but it's just like the way she's kind of delivering the news. She's a bit like, what are you gonna do? Like, these are the cards I've been dealt. I have to deal with what I have, kind of thing. She's I imagine she's quite an enjoyable manager to work with.
I really, really rate that. Sometimes you just got to be brutally honest and say it how it is. Like a bit of a kind of Beardy. I mean, Beardy sometimes goes off on a tangent, but like generally speaking, yeah, he's bang on. West Ham have played well in spells of late, but obviously lost 3-1 to Villa at the weekend. What do we feel they need to add in Janas?
Do you know what? I thought they played well against Villa. I actually thought it was quite an enjoyable end-to-end game, and despite the result, I think West Ham played well. I think they could have and should have scored more. I do think they've improved across the season. They've got some quality players that they brought in that are kind of starting to find their rhythm and starting to find their feet. I think Pavi is so dangerous, super exciting player to watch, and I do think that like they've started to develop a bit of momentum. Add in the cup games. They were getting a little bit of momentum. They're scoring goals. These are the things they've been struggling with, and even yesterday when they went behind early, there was no panic or fear because the team felt confident that they could get back into it. They did. They got another goal. they thought they'd gotten at the lead with a free kick, which was then ruled out for offside, and they were absolutely raging. But and I do kind of feel like that shifted the momentum of the game. But they're showing that they have the ability to get back into games. So, maybe the break has come at the right time. And it's just a case of finding that consistency. Whether they might bring a couple in January, but I think they're doing pretty well with their team is starting to gel. So yeah, it'd be interesting to see how they get on, especially when I think they open up against Chelsea.
I was going to say, I mean, as kind of starts to the year go, they've probably
Happy
had
Christmas.
easier.
Here's a punch in the face. It's like, oh God. Happy New Year, I should say.
You're kind of catching Chelsea on a little bit of a vulnerable moment. So it could be another banana skin. I'm going to keep on using that metaphor.